G'day everyone, this is Eric Perez from Talking Leadership, welcoming you back to our ongoing podcast series around the leadership topic. Today's guest is a great find for myself going out into the big bad world and looking for interesting leaders across different industry sectors to talk to. And today's guest is going to provide us with some great insights into his leadership journey. So I'd like to profile my guest with the following. So my guest is the CEO and founder of REVEL.global. Can I present to you Dan Sims? How are you, Dan?
Good, mate. How are you?
Mate, I'm fantastic. Thank you for joining us. So look, just to get things started, before we get onto the questions proper, what do you do in your day job, mate? What does Dan do for a living?
It's a very good question. So I suppose the 30-second elevator pitch is I run an events and experience business, or an events and media business that focuses around my love and passion in and around the world of wine and drinks. So we run a range of events globally. Our biggest one is Palooza. We run that in 13 cities and 6 countries. And we also do an amazing cheese festival called Mold. But I don't necessarily see us as an events business. I see us as an experience and media business anchored in hospitality. Would be probably the easiest way to describe one of the many things that we tend to do.
Yeah, no worries, Dan. Look, so I'll get into the podcast question. So the first one, first cab off the rank here is, in which sector or industry was your first leadership role, and why did you take that on?
I've always been in hospitality and being a sommelier by trade. So I've always worked in restaurants. In terms of sort of a leadership role would be running a wine program for a restaurant. And that goes back to 10, 15 odd years ago, showing my age. And having to run a wine program with a team of sommeliers. And that was, hospitality, such an amazing industry, community as well, but it doesn't necessarily train you with the tools that are required to run big programs as such. So it's one of those things that you kind of had to learn a little bit on the job, and depending upon where you worked. But in terms of my first role would have been basically running a wine program, probably a taxi dining room. I was the head sommelier there. It was a time when we won Restaurant of the Year. We really built the beverage program up to was like three glasses in the Wineness of the Year awards, and then from there I went to 15 restaurant, which is set up by Jamie Oliver, and I was the head sommelier there for Melbourne. And for those who might remember that restaurant, it's where they took 15 disadvantaged youths and teach them to be cooks. And that was a fantastic opportunity and a massive learning experience. And not just in terms of running the wine program, but then working and mentoring those kids in that program.
Wow, that's quite a background there, mate. And it's I'm sure those leadership experiences were quite varied, particularly when you're dealing with someone like Jamie Oliver and the experiences that he brings to the table, on top of that you're talking about, particularly working with the people that you just mentioned. So, look, I wanted to ask you, in that context, in your experience, have you found that there's a difference between the leadership function and management function?
Huge. It's something that I've had to learn a lot. I think leadership is almost like empowerment. It's about helping your crew, or guide them in a way to come up with it, to make their own decisions and to back themselves. Whereas management is it's like trying to ensure that they do that job. I definitely try to take a leadership role, but of course you have to have a bit of both. I think. I run the sole director of our business, so I have to do a bit of both. It's management and leadership. I think people respond better to leadership than they do management, because that can be stifling. However, I know for a fact, people in our team respond to different things and require different things. So I think as a manager, as a leader, as a CEO, it's a case of going, okay, this is what this person needs, and this is what this person needs, and it could be two very, very different things. Or so I think being a leader is being aware of that, and trying to help them as best as they possibly can.
You used a term that I'd like to unpack a little bit, if I could, mate, and you used the word empowerment. And am I assuming correctly you mean empowerment in the context of sharing that power with those that are working for you, or how do you define empowerment?
Well, I think it's allow them to be the best that they possibly could. And I think even from my early roles of working as a sommelier in restaurants, my philosophy was always, it was my job to teach somebody to do my job. So for me, I need to and it's because I worked in wine. We say, and the default setting for wine when you're talking about is like, we have to educate everybody. We have to educate everybody to death. It was like, no, not necessarily. Knowledge is absolutely important and skills are absolutely important, but you need to also, empower those people to and have faith and trust in them to discover it in their way. Because fundamentally, at the end of the day, if anything goes wrong, and this is a CEO thing in terms of a leadership, is if anything goes wrong in the business, it's my fault. And if I've put a person in a position that they're not comfortable with, or they're not skilled or trained for, then that's my fault for putting them in that position. Or if it goes on for too long, then I didn't see the warning signs and I didn't actually have conversations with that person or I didn't anticipate it well enough, because it's the hardest thing. It's like you want people to be able to make mistakes and allow them to grow into a role, rather than sort of having to, I suppose, nitpick at them all the time to find the mistakes that they've done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And look, the reason I ask this, and I occasionally get some terms thrown at me, that it's good to explain to those listening to the podcast, because what I'm trying to do is get not just existing leaders, but emerging leaders and those that are considering taking on those roles, whether it's in your industry or other industries, that can hear someone like yourself explaining what that means. And from what I heard, for you taking on that responsibility, ultimately the buck stopping with you, it sends quite a powerful message. And it's come up a few times in other discussions that I've had, and that sends a great message to those that are trying to learn who are under you, because by default, those that are working for you aren't you, so they're trying to hopefully get to that level. And even if they're not, learning some of the skills that you can get as a leader is important to carry you through life in lots of different ways. So, okay, so Dan, can I ask about, and this one's not necessarily a negative, but it's more about, leaders make mistakes. So how do you engage with an error or mistake that's attributed to your leadership?
I've made many mistakes. I'm not afraid to admit it. I've made a proverbial shitload of mistakes. But
right.
I think it's a case of being aware enough to admit that they have been mistakes and actually just accept it. And then work out, for me, I suppose how my brain works is I want to understand, if I made a mistake, what happened. I just want to understand why. And I like to think that, and we do this, we do a lot with events that I say to my team all the time. So look, if we get to the end of this and it doesn't work, I'm okay. I just don't want to get to the end of something and go, we should have tried this. Did we throw as much energy and resource at a problem as we could, or did we do it half-assed and expect a great result? So it's like more, I think it's about make a mistake, no worries, but it's almost like trying to unpack it and understand why, and then learn from it. Some people say there's no such thing as mistakes; they're learnings,
Yeah, I could debate that with those people sometimes. When you're a junior and you make a mistake, those that are quite senior above you let you know quite quickly that it's a mistake and it needs to be fixed.
I totally. And look, there's technical things, I suppose. It depends on sort of, how you class a mistake. I mean, there's clerical mistakes, or there's things.
And of course, and you've got degrees of it. But in my travels, I don't remember anyone ever coming up to me going, "Eric, we need to discuss that learning opportunity that occurred the other day." It's more, hey, we got to get this fixed, and we got to get it fixed now. And I think in the heat of the moment, and this is where I think experience comes in. Rousing at someone doesn't necessarily get it fixed properly, or unpack why you did it. But in the heat of the moment, I can understand why human beings being human beings that you might edge for an emotive reaction, and not for all leaders, and I can't speak for all leaders, but in my experience, I've seen kind of a 50-50 split on that, and it really does depend on whether something is internal to the business or whether it's external facing. Do you know what I mean?
Look, I, as I said, I come from hospitality, so we talk about in the middle of service when shit goes down. It's not a democracy. You just got to get it done, and you just. Guys, like, guys, right, and we do this even with events now. So, like, guys, if something comes up and we've made a mistake, let's just solve it and move on and let's figure it out later. Like, it's the heat of battle, it's the heat of the rush of service, and you go, okay, well, let's just get through it, and then we'll talk about it. We'll try and unpack it down the line. You don't want people to make mistakes, but I think you've got to create a culture that's like, okay, don't make mistakes, but if you do, then own it
and let's deal with it.
Don't do it again.
Yeah, okay.
Because everyone does it. It's like, okay, I really messed up there. It's like, yeah, you did. What are you going to do next time? It's like, well, I won't do it. It's like, great. Okay, well, why? But then from a leadership point of view, it's like, why did that person make that mistake? What scenario did they put in? Were they under pressure? Did they had too much on their plate? Were they distracted? Have they got some personal issues? Were they tired? Had they been distracted by somebody else in the office? I mean, what created the circumstances for that person
that led to that? Yeah,
led to that mistake. And so to come down and go, something, the other day, it's like, we missed that. It's like, well, what's the point of me slamming down and go, well, you've really mucked up there. Don't ever do it again. It's like, they're not going to do it again because they know they've made a mistake.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't know they've made a mistake, that's a challenge. That's a challenge. But if that person understands, or acknowledges that someone's made a mistake and go, okay, great, and then move on and then learn from it, then that can only be a good thing.
So, and again, not to get on too much of a negative here, but I need to ask this next question. In your experience, Dan, what's been the most difficult part of being a leader?
Moving from being, I suppose, a colleague to a leader to a boss, and that transition, and it is something that I don't know what to explain about this in a way that doesn't sound pretentious, but I think it's like trying to take a leadership role where and understanding that some of the team and people who work with you, they're not going to tell you everything because you're now you have to you're effectively their boss. And yes, we all like to think that we're all on the same team, one dream, and all that sort of stuff. But it does take that sort of differentiation between, the leadership position and the team. They might not necessarily talk. They might go out and hang out together, and you're not going to be there. So I think there's that transition of like the responsibility that comes with that, and understanding and accepting it. That sometimes being a leader is God, it sounds dramatic, but not like it's not like a lonely experience because you surround yourself with so many people, but fundamentally that buck stops here. I suppose idea is the most important. I think it's that's coming to understand that, and coming to accept that the buck stops with you, and also that not everyone's going to like you.
Sure, and that look that's that commentary. You're not alone in saying that. I think from the not I think, I know from the feedback that I've had on these podcasts that, yeah, leadership can be a lonely place. And yeah, you're not in the game necessarily to be liked by everyone. I think if you can develop respectful working relationships and people go, and this is the thing that's always struck me as curious, and because I've been in a senior leadership role now for about 5 years, going on 6 years now as a CEO in a small not-for-profit organization. And in your travels, you meet people and you think, oh, what's motivating them to do their job? And a lot of people don't go to work for a sense of satisfaction. They go for a paycheck, and they're quite happy to be as professional as they need to be in the 7 or 8 hours that they're with the person they're working for. And then when that ends, it's their time, and they don't give a flying hoo-ha about what happens in the business. And those people exist, and I think there's a lot of them out there. And then you've got some that...
And that's cool.
Yeah, that is great. And then you've got some on that spectrum.
Oh, God, I would love that. I've had days where I go, I'd love to go to have...
Sure. and I guess from what I've seen from what my travels and what I hear from you is, then on that spectrum, if you can call it that, there are some that go to work to fulfill a need to do something and to be creative and to use it as a creative outlet. And I do really believe from the entrepreneurs that I've interviewed, you being one of them, that you get a buzz from the kind of work that you do, but that doesn't necessarily always pay the bill. So you've got to make the workplace productive to help you to have that capacity to be creative and so on in the business. And this discussion is quite nice because it segues into my next question, which is definitely a more positive one, is how do you measure success as a leader, Dan?
Yeah, well, it's a really interesting question. It's like, I think a really successful, highly positive team. How do I measure my success as a leader? I constantly feel like I could do better. And I think it's, having a really great team around you that's working cohesively, that's positive, that people come to work and they want to be there. I think that you can create a culture that's positive and effective. I think that's probably the biggest successful leader, and also being self-aware enough to know when it's not working. And again, a few years back, I remember it was very early days of Rebel. We had a year where we grew so much, it was crazy. We went from working around a kitchen table in my apartment to we had events in Singapore and Tokyo and everything. It was just crazy. We had this massive growth year, and I got to a point where I was like, whoa, hang on a minute. This is running 100 miles an hour, and I don't think I'm being an effective leader. I need some help. And I actually spoke to a good mate of mine, Justin Dry from Vino Mofo, and had a good chat with him, and ended up catching up with a fantastic coach called Nadia Arini, and she was amazing. And I got her to come in and basically mentor me, but also work with the team as well to go, okay, right, well, how do we create a culture here now at the starting point of this before we spiral into 2 years down the track and the culture's really negative. And Nadia was fantastic. And that was probably some of the best advice I've had from her around being a leader. And because I caught up with her and I was having coffee and I was complaining. It's like I thought, oh God, I'm so tired and I'm really stressed and I've got all these things. And she turned to me, she said, Dan, with love, one thing you've got to understand: no one cares. No one cares that you're tired. No one cares. And it reminds me of another great piece of advice I had from another amazing woman, a friend of mine, Andrea Frost, who said to me, again, when the same thing I was complaining about so much on, she's just turned to me and just, with love, it's like, Dan, you got to remember, nobody asked you to do this. So, and they're really the core things that I take on board in terms of our businesses. Like, yeah, you're right. No one asked me to do this business. No one asked me to. No one asked any winery to make wine. Nobody, if you decide to do something, nobody came up and said, I want you to do it. You've chosen it. So if you've chosen this entrepreneurial or or you've decided to run your own business, you've made that decision. So you've got to own it. And nobody is going to care as much about your business as you will.
Of course. Yeah.
And that's really what Nadi was saying, is like, this is yours and this is your life and this is it. But you've got to look after your team. You know, and you can't drive them 100 miles an hour all the time. They're people. We're humans. And so I think measuring this, when you go back to what you're saying about measuring the success of a leader, is like being aware enough and self-aware enough about how is your team working, and are they in the right direction, and are you taking them in the right direction, or are you taking them somewhere that you're not ready to do? And heck, that goes back to mistakes. I've done that many times where we've tried to do something and we weren't ready, and we hurt as a result, and we hurt as a team, and we hurt as a business, because fundamentally that was my fault, because I thought we could do it, but when we couldn't.
Okay, and it seems that you had an epiphany very early on around getting the culture right early on in the development of the business, and that can be a double-edged sword, because you in those early stages you're trying to get to know what the norms of the business are, and you had enough nous to go out and get that help. I was going to say it's nice to have friends that can tell you the harsh realities of the business world, and yeah, there's a lot of truth to what they say. And look, they might not care, or the general public might not care that you're tired and a bit over it and overworked, but there is a component when it comes to family or those around you, your friends, that they see you tired, they see you irritable, or you start having problems in relationships, that, yeah, being able to self-regulate and understand when things might be going a bit pear-shaped is a good learning, and good for anybody in any leadership role, whether you're running your own business or you're in a small organization or you're in a massive multinational. If you can't get some of that stuff right, you'll burn either yourself or other people out, and that doesn't help anybody.
Exactly, and that's really, again, what's going back to what you're saying. It's like, you got to look at how are these guys, how are you pushing your team? If you're going 100 miles an hour, burning the midnight oil, yes, you have to work hard. Like, if you're doing your own business, you have to work hard. You have to go for it, and you've got to decide that this is what you wholeheartedly want to do, and you've got to go for it. But no, you do not want to burn yourself out. You don't want to have the negative effects that come with it, and you've got to look after yourself as a human being. There's drive and motivation, all that sort of stuff, but you've got to almost like take as you would if somebody asked you to, if you were working for somebody else and you were working as that hard, would you actually be as efficient? So it's like,
okay, yeah. And as an aside, but I think important, I think the more tired you get every hour, every minute you put in is that much less productive, because you're not focused, and being tired all the time or being stressed all the time doesn't help.
It doesn't make you efficient.
Just waste your time.
Yeah, I try to take, whether it's taking some time out to go and clean my head. Like for me, it's I have to go for a walk in the morning because it actually helps clean my head. That's how everyone's got their own thing. They might go to yoga or whatever to take some time out for yourself to clear your head. So you walk into the office and you're on.
You're ready to go. Yep. Dan, look, I've got a couple of statements here, and you've answered them partially, but I'll put them to you for a more full answer if I can. So yep. The first one being, on-the-job experience develops better leaders.
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Great. So for the listeners, that's a yes.
You can't teach experience.
Sure.
And I think that comes with growing on the job, absolutely, because fundamentally you have to work with people. And this is what I think where it comes into my experience with hospitality, and why I think hospitality is such an incredible school for learning and understanding people. Because leadership, you're having to lead and work with people, and you have to understand people. And the best thing about hospitality, I was front of house. I wasn't in the kitchen. I'm not a narcissist masochist. So,
for the sake of the listeners, for those that are in the kitchen or chefs, that's not a view of the program or the program host. But no, carry on, mate.
Look, I've worked in hospitality my entire career, and it's yes, they're all quite mad in the kitchen, wonderfully and creatively, but they don't have to talk to people, and that's the thing, and that goes into culture. is that, for your front of house, you have to talk with people every single day, and your personality you have to learn how to read people, and you pick up on their vibes, and it's a really great training ground. So on the job experience, yes, because you have to become a better leader because you have more opportunity to interact with people.
Sure. So let me put the other side to that. Then formal education helps to develop better leaders.
I think yes, absolutely, to give you some structure and absolutely some formal education. I've a lot of people in consultants have got formal education. I don't, formal secondary. Sorry, I've got, I finished high school, but I didn't do any sort of university or anything like that. But I think education does help, but it's not everything. You've got to have a mix of both.
Sure, no, that's great.
Experience is still critical, because you can't teach experience.
Yeah, no, that fully agree with that. So how about this one? And this one, I'll be very interested in your response to this one. Leaders are born, not made.
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Really, I don't know. I think it's like the nature versus nurture scenario, and I would say that the leaders are nurtured, and yeah, there has to be a drive, but that could come from family, that could come from influences. Leaders are born in so many different places. It depends, all over the world, and it doesn't matter about where they're from or who they are. I think they grow into it.
Okay, and that seems to be a mix of the two. And that I think you're the first podcast guest that I've had that's made that connection, that it's like the nature versus nurture argument. And I'm still a fence sitter, I think, because you're probably the same. In my travels, I've met people that are just naturally gifted at the leadership game.
Well, I think absolutely. That comes back to self-awareness.
And you did mention that. You did mention that a fair bit here. That degree of self-awareness and being able to understand the other and the context in which you work, I think is fairly important. And you probably learnt that in a big bad way in the hospitality industry, because you've got people from all walks of life in your face, so to speak, and you've got to be able to understand where they're coming from. May not necessarily agree. So I'm sure you've had the angry customer or two, but
totally. Yeah, and again, and that's the thing, when everyone has an angry customer, they look at you. It's your fault. It might not be your fault, but it's still your fault in that moment.
Yeah, sure. And
you've got to solve it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. In those situations when somebody says this is your fault, instead of harping on whose fault it is, do you quickly go into the, how do I resolve this to make everybody happy, and let's just get on with things, as opposed to in that moment worrying about whose fault something was?
Oh, definitely. You're in the middle of service. Like, okay, well, look, you can explain the scenario to, like, nobody cares. If you're in a restaurant, they don't care that whoever in the kitchen had a bad day and the chef mucked up, or whatever, someone dropped something, or they retired. They don't care. They're there to have dinner. So it's like putting yourself in this scenario going, yeah, cool, I get it, but how are you going to solve it?
Sure.
And that's the thing. It's like, oh yeah, but this one here, it's like, oh yeah, look, I'm really sorry. It's like, cool, I get you sorry, but how are we solving this?
Yeah, okay. And that every industry brings a different side to that. And for the sake of the listeners, working in a not-for-profit, I don't see a lot of the public direct. So it's always interesting to talk to people who have been in the public eye, very much like yourself and others that work in sectors where dealing with the public is in their face. Is that, yeah, people in your store or buying something, and they're there for their own reasons, and they couldn't give a flying hoo-ha what's going on with anything else in the business. They just want a service delivered. And, you have to be aware of that people aren't necessarily there to console you on your bad day.
Yeah, totally. Well, I'll tell you this sort of funny story. Well, with the events that we do, we sometimes do events back-to-back in different cities. So, like, recently we did Pinnapalooza in Melbourne. We have about 3,000 people that day, and then we backed it up in Brisbane the following. We did about 1,500 people. So we all do the event. We all get on a plane with these producers, and we go up to Brisbane. And then in the morning we always brief, and like we did, in restaurant service, I always brief all the producers. We bring everyone together in a collectiveness. We say, right, this is what's going to happen. How we're going. I believe in that before we go into an event. And when I'm in Brisbane the next morning, when we do back to back, I just say to them, look, I totally get it. I think we're all a little bit tired. We had a big day yesterday and we're probably feeling a little bit fragile. But guess what? We've got 1,500 people turning up today who don't care. So harden up, put on a happy face, and let's do this, because no one there cares that you've had a really bad day. They're there for an experience and they want to enjoy it. So just embrace it and go, yeah, you're right, I am tired, but I'm going to have a really good day.
And like you said, that's the business that you're in, is you're providing an experience for someone who's going there with the intention of, hey, I love my wine, or I want to see what's on offer. And that's a good thing to keep in your mind, that understanding your customer or the other is a critical part of being
absolutely. And also the other part of that is saying that if you're going to do it properly. Don't, because you're saying it's like, oh, we're doing this event, or I'm doing this, whatever, I'm doing this meeting and I'm really tired and I just can't be bothered doing it. It's like, well, don't do it then.
There you go.
Don't do it. And it's like doing something half-assed and expecting a great result. It's like, well, if you did it half-assed and you got a bad result, well, of course you bloody did.
Yeah, that's right. Look, this is the bit in the podcast where I try to pick your brains a little bit around some work that I'm doing. So I'm completing some tertiary studies looking at leadership development, and the two key things core leader capabilities that I'm seeing in the literature that are driving fit for future leaders, at least in the ag sector, which I'm looking at, is strategic thinking and foresight. So from your travels, Dan, how do you rate strategic thinking and foresight as leader capabilities? Are they important, not important?
Oh, hugely.
Yeah.
I think you've also got to allow yourself time to think. And strategic thinking and foresight is about listening, observing, reading, not just things within your industry, but others. And again, because so often if you're in one sector, you can just put the blinkers on and observe everything through the lens of that sector. Whereas good strategic thinking is thinking about what are the other factors that are out there, and then looking at all the information and data that's available to you, and then applying a strategy around it. And to get that foresight, you've got to look at everything in the playing field, what is happening, because there are so many factors now. It's not just one thing, it's many, to try and anticipate as much of that as you possibly can.
No, thank you for sharing that. And that's another new thing that I've heard, is to allow yourself time to think. And that, I think, is often lost in our day-to-day lives in work. And look, I'm not being naive. In some organizations, so I'm thinking large corporates and the people I know in that space, sometimes you've got, seconds or milliseconds to get a decision out, and you've got to base it on a whole host of things. Whereas in other contexts, if you're trying to develop a strategy in the business longer term, giving yourself that time to think is really important, because no one is going to grade you on how long it took you to come up with an awesome idea. It's, if you've got the idea and you've got the way to implement it, it might have taken you a day or 2 days or a week to come up with, but that time to think is important, and it hasn't really come up a lot in the conversation. So thank you for sharing that, mate, because I think it is important for any leader.
My thinking is, again, it's like ideas, right? It feels like there are so many, I've got this great idea. It's like, yeah, cool. Okay, well, the ideas don't necessarily, really good ideas or concepts don't just pop into your head. They come from pondering and thinking and observing and looking at so many things around it. And again, you can have the right idea at the wrong time with the wrong resource. There's plenty of stories in terms of businesses out there that had a really great idea just at the wrong time. In terms of effective businesses, I'm sure the one correlation they all have is timing. Look at Uber and Airbnb or Google or Facebook. It happened at the right time, and that's just one of those things, isn't it? But I think ideas take they take time to develop.
Absolutely. Dan, this is the last question in the podcast, and this is an interesting one, and I hope you will engage with this. in the spirit that it's intended. So what might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
Oh, what would I say to my younger self? I'd probably write a book to my younger self. I think it's patience. What would I say? Just one, be patient, be patient, be patient. Back yourself, and it's okay. It's okay to lead.
Wow. Okay.
Don't be afraid to lead, because it's going to be okay. But I think the main one there is patience. And sometimes moving fast, you've got to go slow to move fast.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. And that's a great way to end the podcast. So for the listeners, I've been chatting with Dan Sims, the CEO and founder of REVEL.global. Dan, thank you for your time.
My pleasure, mate. Thank you.
So for the listeners again, this has been Eric Perez. Thank you for joining me on Talking Leadership, and I'll catch you all on the next podcast.